My role as a solicitor may change when dealing with a case that's got an aspect of domestic violence, because you just have to make sure that you're being extra vigilant to ask a client whether there has been violence, because a lot of people will say that there hasn't been. A lot of especially victims, will say that they haven't been subjected to violence because they may be ashamed, they may be upset that this has happened, they may be feeling embarrassed about it, they may also feel that it was their fault and that they actually asked for it. So you've got to be very careful in your screening of a client to make sure that you do cover all of these issues, but that you ask very specific tailored questions to see whether there has been any violence. And it may be that that client denies it on the first couple of meetings, and it's only the third, fourth meeting, when you've built up that trust with the client, that they will actually admit they have been subjected to domestic violence, that it might possibly have been going on for a long, long time, they haven't been able to tell anybody. What you've also got to remember is that these perpetrators of domestic violence are very clever at what they do, and they will make a victim feel as though they asked for it and that it was their fault, that there was no other option other than to lash out, and that victim made them lash out, and if they hadn't behaved in a certain way, it wouldn't have happened. So people don't want to admit that they've been that victim because they think it's their fault, and it isn't their fault. Nobody should be subjected to domestic violence, whether you're male or female. If it's a man that's comes to see you, they may not want to admit that their female partner's been violent towards them, because that is something that is, although it is a lower percentage that female are violent towards men, I believe that the reason for that is because it's unreported. You don't have a lot of men seeking injunctions, you don't have a lot of men seeking the involvement of police, because they're embarrassed about it. They're embarrassed that their female partner has hurt them, and it's something that we've constantly got to be checking for, constantly got to be screening, and at least because we've got so many lawyers who are very, very experienced, we can use our experience to see that this might be a case that involves domestic violence, and make sure that we constantly keep aware of that and keep it at the forefront of our minds, to make sure that as a family unit we put the right steps in place for the support, for the counselling if it's needed, and for any steps that need to be taken to separate this family out and to protect the victims, whether that be an injunction order, which is known as a non-molestation order, or whether it be to separate the family sooner rather than later, to ask that perpetrator to leave. And there's ways that we can do it in terms of doing it in a nice way, to say, please take steps to leave the property within the next few days, or we can get an order to oust that person from their home to make sure that the victim and the children are protected sooner rather than later. You will ask if the children have heard or witnessed any violence, and often people will say no, they haven't witnessed it, which might be true, but that they haven't heard it, and you'd be very surprised at what children can hear. And the emotional impact of a child hearing their parents fighting or their mother being hurt is just as bad as a child actually witnessing it, or even being a party to the violence themselves. So it's important in those circumstances to make sure that not only the parent who's being hurt gets the right support, but to make sure that the children get that support as well, that they understand why something has happened. And again, the most important thing for a child is to understand that it's not their fault, and that they're loved equally by both parents, because that's something that they will go through life thinking that if I'd have just been a bit better, if I hadn't have done this, then it wouldn't have happened. And obviously that's not the case, because it's not a child's fault when a relationship breaks down.